I hadn't even buried my father yet, and he was already in my bed. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I've said it out loud to myself in the mirror more than once, and it never sounds better. It still lands in my stomach like a stone. But some truths come wrapped in shame. Some nights rewrite you before you can stop them. And some people walk into your life at the worst possible moment and stay. My name is Eleanor Ashcroft. I'm 49 years old. And for most of my adult life, I've been known as the quiet one in my family, the practical daughter, the calm niece, the reliable friend who doesn't raise her voice or fall apart in public. I work in a small gallery in South Kensington, the kind that hosts poetry readings and contemporary art that most people walk past without understanding. I curate silence for a living, I suppose. I like beautiful things in quiet rooms, and that's what my life had become. A quiet room. I wasn't married. Never had been. I'd had relationships, of course, some long, some sharp, some that vanished before they even took shape. But none of them stayed. I told myself I was okay with that. I had independence, stability, a nameplate on my office door, and a flat that smelled faintly of sandalwood and tea leaves. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday evening. Rain smeared against the windows, and I'd just made a list of paintings for our spring exhibit. And then, Miss Ashcroft, I'm so sorry to inform you. Words collapsed into themselves. My father. Stroke. Gone before the ambulance even arrived. My first instinct was to finish what I was doing. I sat there at my desk for another 10 minutes, staring at my notepad as if the gravity of death could be negotiated with one more item on a checklist. The funeral was set for Saturday in Cambridge, the town he had taught in for the last 30 years. I hadn't been back in ages. I think we both liked the distance. He was a scholar, a purist, a man who treated books as sacred objects and viewed emotions as something best left inside literature. We weren't estranged, not exactly, just translated. We communicated through layers. A postcard here, an email about an exhibition I'd curated, a brief phone call where he'd ask if I'd read the new Franzen, and I'd pretend I had. So when I arrived at his house, the one he'd lived in since 1983, it felt like walking into a preserved memory. The walls hadn't changed, neither had the smell. Paper, tobacco, something faintly medicinal. There were books on every surface, of course. Books and his damned fountain pens. I expected family, old colleagues, neighbors. I didn't expect him. He was standing near the back door, helping someone unload wine bottles. Tall, maybe 6 foot, with dark, slightly unkempt hair and a worn satchel slung over one shoulder. He looked too young to be one of my father's students, and yet too composed to be someone's child dragged along for the event. I noticed the way he stood, not awkward, not overly polite, but grounded, like he belonged there. It made me uncomfortable. Later, during the service, I saw him again, sitting alone. 2 rows behind me, hands clasped, eyes unmoving. He didn't cry. He didn't fidget. He just watched. It wasn't until much later, after the guests had gone, after the casserole dishes had been scraped clean and the whiskey had started flowing, that I learned who he was. "Eleanor," he said softly, as I passed him near the hallway. "Thomas Finch. I was one of your father's doctoral students." He extended his hand, but I didn't take it right away. I looked at him, really looked, the slight stubble, the tired eyes, the quiet grief. He wasn't trying to charm me. He wasn't even trying to be remembered. He was just there. "My father mentioned you," I lied. He smiled but didn't correct me. We talked for a few minutes. About books, about the university, about how my father had taught until the very end. He said it with a kind of reverence that made my throat close up. I had to excuse myself. The next morning, I wandered downstairs in my robe, hair unbrushed, expecting the house to be empty. But it wasn't. He was in the study, sleeves rolled up, sorting through my father's lecture notes. "Universities requested some of his archives," he said gently. I thought I'd help, if that's all right. I didn't have the strength to object. Or maybe I just didn't want to. He made tea. The good kind, not the supermarket bags my father stockpiled. And for the next several hours, we worked in silence. Occasionally, he'd pass me something. A marginal note, a scribbled quote. Once, he held up a photo. One of me, at age 22, smiling beside a garden sculpture. My father had kept it between pages of Yeats. He talked about you more than you think, Thomas said. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to cry again. That night, we drank wine by the fireplace. I had changed into a wool sweater and jeans, tried to compose myself. He sat opposite me, legs crossed, listening to me talk about my father as if I were describing someone else's life. We laughed once, when I told him how my father used to quote Eliot at the post office. There was a pause, then another. He looked at me, and something shifted. It wasn't overt, no touching, no sudden move, just a look, long, slow, and unblinking. I stood up first. My heart was hammering so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. Are you staying nearby? I asked. He shook his head. No room left in town. I figured I'd sleep on the couch. I nodded, then turned, then stopped. You can stay in the guest room, I said. It came out too fast, too soft. He paused, then said, Thank you. I went upstairs, teeth still clenched. I showered. I sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, robe damp against my back. I told myself I'd lock the door. I didn't. I lay awake most of that night. The guest room was just down the hall. I could hear the old house creaking, sighing in its usual ways, the faint rattle of pipes, the occasional thud from the radiators. But beneath all that was something quieter, more dangerous. My heartbeat. Fast. Too fast. I wasn't used to the sound of another person in the house. My father had lived alone for years, and though I'd visited in the past, it had always been in the context of family, obligation, polite weekends. This was different. There was someone just a few feet away from me who didn't feel like a stranger, and that unsettled me more than if he had. I got up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The hallway was dimly lit, just one lamp flickering by the stairs. I didn't expect to see him, but there he was, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, still fully dressed. We both froze for a second. I couldn't sleep, he said. Too many books in that room. It's like he's still talking. I smiled faintly, tugging the rope tighter around my waist. That sounds about right. Do you want some? He asked, gesturing to the kettle. I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't want tea. I just didn't want to be alone. We sat across from each other at the table. He in that same white shirt, sleeves rolled, top button undone. I remember staring at his hands. He had long, slender fingers, the kind of hands that looked like they belonged to a pianist or a poet. He held his cup carefully, like it was the only thing tethering him to the room. We talked. Not about anything important. Mostly memories. Strange, soft-edged ones that surfaced without warning. I told him how my father used to organize his books by the color of their spines, just to see what patterns emerged. He laughed and said he once spent an entire afternoon trying to explain to my father why Google Scholar wasn't a moral failing. And then, somewhere between silence and a sip of tea, it happened. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a small thing, gentle, barely a touch. But it broke something in me. I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked. There was no pity in his eyes, no hesitation, just heat. Steady, unspoken, adult heat. The kind that simmers rather than burns. And I knew, right then, that I wasn't going back to bed alone. I stood up first. He followed. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The house felt like it was holding its breath as we moved down the hallway. Silent, careful, like trespassers. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the door to my room. I turned to face him in the low lamplight, and for a moment We both just stood there. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I've wanted to touch you since I saw you at the funeral." I should have said something, objected, laughed it off, but all I did was breathe. And then we were kissing. Slowly at first, then deeper. His mouth was warm, his hands firm and certain. There was nothing boyish about him, nothing unsure. It had been years since I'd felt someone want me like that. Not politely, not dutifully, but hungrily. I let him undress me. I let him see the parts of me I usually apologized for. And he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. If anything, he looked like he wanted to memorize me. We didn't speak much. There were just sounds. Breath, skin, soft groans that felt more like prayers. He was gentle, but not afraid. And I wasn't the woman I usually was. I didn't think about how I looked. I didn't worry about mourning regrets. For the first time in years, I let myself just feel. When it was over, we lay there in silence. My head on his chest, his arm around my shoulder. No guilt, no explanations. Just heat and grief, tangled together in sheets that still smelled faintly of lavender and old linen. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to the sound of birds and weak gray light filtering through the curtains. He was still there, sleeping peacefully, as if we hadn't just broken every rule of decorum and grief. For a moment, I just watched him, the way his chest rose and fell, the faint shadow of a bruise on his jaw I hadn't noticed the night before, the small smile that tugged at his mouth even in sleep. And then it hit me. What have I done? The weight of it landed hard. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my robe, and went downstairs. The kettle clicked on automatically. My father had set it that way years ago. The house felt colder now, more real. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a mug, staring at the garden. The frost hadn't lifted yet. Everything looked still, untouched. But I wasn't. When I heard the stairs creak, I didn't turn around. He stood behind me for a moment before speaking. "Do you regret it?" I swallowed. "No," I said. "But I don't know what to do with it." He didn't answer. He just came to sit beside me. We didn't kiss again that morning. We didn't need to. There was something quieter between us now. A knowing. A tether. I thought that would be the end of it. One night. One lapse in judgment, wrapped in morning and moonlight. But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I kept thinking it would feel more wrong in the daylight. That shame would catch up to me, slide in between the cracks, coil around my ribs like a snake. But it didn't. That morning, everything felt strangely calm, muted, like the world had dimmed the volume out of respect. Thomas didn't press me. He didn't touch me again. He just stayed nearby, helped clean the kitchen, loaded a few boxes with my father's books without asking too many questions. We acted like nothing had happened, and yet everything had. I found myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking. The way he moved, the way he tilted his head when he read old scribbled marginalia in a tattered copy of Rilke. He was quiet but intentional, confident but not arrogant. There was something mature in the way he held himself, in stark contrast to the 27 years he claimed to have lived. And I felt myself slipping. After lunch, I escaped to the garden. My father had once let it grow wild, convinced that nature arranged itself better than any gardener ever could. It was overgrown now, winter bare and tangled, the remains of rosemary and mint peeking through frost-bitten leaves. I lit a cigarette. I hadn't smoked in years, but somehow my hand remembered the shape of it, the ritual. And then I heard the crunch of boots behind me. "I didn't mean to scare you," Thomas said softly. "You didn't." I lied. He stood beside me, not too close, just close enough that I could feel the static tension between our sleeves. He looked out at the garden for a long moment, then said, "You remind me of him." I turned to look at him, surprised. "Not in how you speak," he added quickly, but in how you look at things. Your eyes pause the same way when you think. I exhaled. Smoke curled between us. I used to think he didn't see me at all, I murmured, that he only saw the version of me he wanted. Thomas nodded. He loved you. Fiercely. But he wasn't good at showing it. We stood in silence for a while. The kind of silence that feels fuller than words. I should have gone inside. I should have ended it there. Let the moment pass. But instead, I said, "Do you want to walk with me?" We didn't say where. We just went. Coats zipped, scarves thrown loosely over shoulders. The streets of Cambridge were quiet, brittle with cold. I led him down the lane toward Midsummer Common, where the river curled like a gray ribbon beneath skeletal trees. He told me more about their tutorials, about how my father would challenge his assumptions, make him defend every sentence. He made me rewrite an essay 8 times, Thomas said with a grin. Said my original thesis was philosophical laziness wrapped in poetic fluff. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the phone call. It felt like releasing air I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. When we got back to the house, the sun was already lowering, the sky bruised with pink and slate. I poured us both a small whiskey. I don't even like whiskey, but it was what my father drank, and in that moment, it felt right. We didn't talk much after that, just soft music playing from the old stereo, some old jazz vinyl that crackled every few seconds like a heartbeat. And then he looked at me again, not with heat this time, but something steadier, like gravity. "I don't want to confuse you," he said. "You're not," I replied, too quickly. He stood, walked to where I was sitting, and crouched, his hands resting on the armrest of my chair, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth. "You don't owe me anything," he said. Not explanation, not repetition, not guilt. His voice was quiet but firm, like someone setting down a boundary, or crossing one. I reached for his hand. That night wasn't like the first. It was slower, stranger, more intimate in ways I hadn't expected. We didn't undress all at once. We took our time, fingers tracing fabric, eyes locked. I let him see me again, and this time I saw him too. The vulnerability beneath the confidence, the need wrapped in restraint. It wasn't just sex, it was something else, something I hadn't allowed myself in years. He didn't make promises. I didn't ask for any. But in the dark, as he whispered my name against my shoulder, I felt something open in me, something dangerous. Because I wanted it again, not just the act, him. I woke up early the next morning. He was still asleep, one arm draped over the pillow I'd abandoned. His face was turned slightly toward the light, and I found myself memorizing him. The curve of his mouth, the faint dimple in his cheek, the tension even in rest. I got dressed quietly and went downstairs. My hands shook as I poured coffee. What was I doing? He was 27, a student, my father's student. He should have been in a flat share with other postgrads, flirting in pubs, not buried in grief with a woman twice his age in her childhood home. But the thought of him leaving made my stomach clench. I sat on the floor by the bookshelf, picking at the edges of old photographs, searching for something. Clarity, guilt, a sign. Instead, I found an envelope. It was addressed to me, handwritten in my father's unmistakable cursive. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am gone. I won't make this long. I never said it properly, but I was proud of you. Not for what you did or didn't do, just for who you are. I watched you become someone with a voice, even if you didn't always use it aloud. I hope you find someone who sees that in you. I hope you let them in. And I hope you forgive me for not being better at this. Dad." My hands went limp. I didn't hear Thomas come in, but he sat beside me, without a word, and placed a hand gently on mine. "I didn't know he wrote that," he whispered. "I didn't either. We sat there for what felt like an hour. The heat of his hand, the weight of the letter. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't going to go away. The days blurred. I stayed in Cambridge longer than I meant to. Originally, I'd planned to be there only 3 nights. Just long enough to arrange the cremation, meet with the solicitor, and sort through the most urgent documents. But each time I started to pack, something held me back. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was inertia. Or maybe it was the way Thomas moved through the house like he belonged there. He stayed too, though we never explicitly agreed on it. His flat was across town, but he kept arriving in the mornings and leaving after dinner, if at all. He slept beside me most nights. We never discussed it. We didn't need to. It wasn't passion that kept him in my bed. It was presence, warmth, a shared quiet. We didn't always have sex. Some nights, we just held each other, drifting between dreams and memory. I started wearing my father's old cardigan. It was far too big, moth-eaten at the sleeves, and smelled faintly of pipe smoke. But it made me feel grounded, like he was still there somehow. Sometimes Thomas would smile faintly when he saw me in it. He never said anything, but I saw the softness in his eyes. I thought we could stay like that forever, in this cocoon of suspended reality, surrounded by books and silence and unspoken understanding. But real life doesn't wait politely outside the door. It finds its way in. The first rupture came as a phone call. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a soup I hadn't truly planned to make, when my phone lit up with my sister's name. Lydia. We hadn't spoken properly in almost a year. She lived in Devon with her second husband and rarely visited, unless there was a crisis. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Ellie? Her voice was tight, cautious. I just heard about Dad. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I bit my lip. It's fine. Are you still in Cambridge? Yes. With anyone? I froze. She'd always had that tone. Half interested, half suspicious. I'm not alone, I said vaguely. Well, the solicitor's office called me, she continued, ignoring my answer. They said you've been handling everything. I think I should come up. Be part of it. I nearly laughed. Now she wanted to be part of it? That's not necessary, lied. It's mostly sorted. But it's our father. I closed my eyes, pinched the bridge of my nose. You weren't here when he was alive. There was silence on the line. And then coldly, that's not fair. Neither was any of it. But I didn't say more. I just told her I'd be back in London by the end of the week and hung up. Thomas walked in a few minutes later and saw me standing by the sink, staring out the window, knife still in hand. Bad call? He asked gently. I nodded. My sister. She's decided to have opinions. He came up behind me, placed his hands lightly on my hips. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. I know, I said. But I also don't know what I'm doing. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, Do you want this to stop? I turned to look at him. His face was so close, so steady. No, I whispered. We kissed again that night, slower than before, as if we were both aware of how fragile the illusion was. We undressed each other like people who knew they shouldn't, not because of guilt, but because the world outside didn't have a place for this. Afterwards, as I traced my fingers across his chest, he said something that caught me off guard. I told him about you, you know. I blinked. What? Your father. Last summer, we were talking late, after a seminar. I told him I'd met someone at the gallery, that I found her beautiful in this arresting, unreachable way, and he knew it was you. I sat up slightly, stunned. He didn't say anything. He just sipped his scotch and said, She's not someone you can possess, only witness. I didn't know what to say. Thomas reached up, brushed a strand of hair from my face. I thought he was warning me off. Maybe he was, but it didn't matter. The intimacy of it hit me like a wave. This wasn't just attraction. It was history, memory, connection, but it was also madness. He was 27. I was nearly 50. This couldn't be real. It couldn't last. Still, I didn't ask him to leave. The next morning, I packed. Not all of it, just enough. I left a few things behind on purpose. Thomas helped me carry the boxes to the car. "I'll follow you," he said simply. "To London." And he did. The city felt colder than I remembered, more aggressive. The street noise, the sirens, the people brushing past each other like ghosts. My flat was small, sparse. A few framed prints, some pottery, too many books. He didn't say anything about it. He just made tea and found a blanket and curled up on my sofa like it had always been his. And that night, when he reached for me, I didn't hesitate. We made love like people who knew it couldn't last, like it was borrowed time. And maybe it was. The next few weeks passed in a kind of daze. He'd go to his lectures during the day. I'd return to work at the gallery, feigning normalcy, smiling at patrons, nodding at modern sculptures I no longer understood. At night, we'd come home to each other, eat simple food, share stories, fall into bed like it was the only place that made sense. But underneath it all, I felt the edges fraying, whispers at the gallery, a look from Lydia when she finally visited and saw him in my kitchen. The text from an old friend, "Is it true? The boy from your father's department?" That word, boy, it stung. It made me pull away slightly, even as he leaned in closer. One night, after too much wine and an argument about nothing, laundry of all things, I snapped. "This isn't real," I said. "This is grief. It's trauma. It's not sustainable." Thomas didn't flinch. "But it feels real," he said, "doesn't it?" I didn't answer, because it did. It felt more real than anything had in years, and that terrified me more than anything. I started pretending I didn't notice the looks, the way people paused mid-sentence when Thomas entered a room, the half-smiles from my colleagues, the sudden change in tone when someone realized he wasn't my assistant or a visiting nephew. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that the gallery world was too self-involved, too consumed with installations and collectors and avant-garde statements, to notice something as banal as an age gap affair. But the whispers found their way in. They always do. One afternoon, I walked into the break room and found two of the junior curators mid-conversation, hushed, intense. They stopped the moment I entered, plastering on strained smiles. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Of course," said Emily too quickly. I nodded and made myself a cup of tea, my back stiff with awareness. Later, I caught my reflection in the glass of the exhibit case, the fine lines at the corners of my eyes, the streaks of silver in my hair I hadn't bothered to dye. I used to wear those marks like armor. Now I saw them differently. I wondered what Thomas saw. When he looked at me, did he see the woman he had been captivated by at the gallery that night? Or did he see the widow-like figure I was becoming, grieving not only my father, but the life I'd built before him? That evening, I brought it up for the first time. We were lying in bed, the window cracked open to let in the city air. His chest was warm beneath my cheek, his fingers lazily tracing the outline of my shoulder. "Do you ever think about what people are saying?" He didn't respond right away. "I try not to," he said finally. "That's not the same as saying you don't." He exhaled, shifted so he could look at me directly. "Do you?" "All the time," I whispered. He didn't flinch, just looked at me with that same steady, unreadable gaze. "Then we should talk about it," he said. "What this is, what it means." I sat up slowly, pulled the blanket tighter around me. "I don't know what it is," I admitted. "I know how it started. I know how it feels. But what does that change?" He reached for my hand, held it gently. "It doesn't have to change anything. But I need to know you're not regretting this." I wanted to say no, that I wasn't, that I had never felt more alive, more seen, more desired. But I also thought of the text from Lydia, the way she had looked at me over tea, coolly appraising. You always did like being the exception, she'd said. And it stung. Because maybe she was right. I don't regret it, I said at last. But I don't know if I can keep living two lives. He nodded slowly, releasing my hand. And then came the final straw. A letter. Not an email, not a message, a proper, printed letter, folded into an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sentence, typed. He's using you, and you're too old to pretend otherwise. No signature, no clue who had sent it. I read it 3 times before tearing it in half, then into quarters, then again and again, until the pieces were small enough to flush. But the words stayed. They echoed in my mind when I looked at Thomas shaving in the mirror, when he kissed my neck in the morning, when he made me laugh with some offhand comment about academic politics. I tried to bury it. I tried to tell myself that people were cruel, that someone was jealous or vindictive or bored. But the seed had been planted. That night, I didn't let him touch me. I turned away when he reached for me under the covers. He didn't push. He just said, "Rough day?" And I lied. Just tired. The distance grew quickly after that. Not in obvious ways. We still had dinner together, still exchanged glances that lingered longer than necessary. But there was a tightness to it all. A quiet awkwardness that hadn't been there before. One night, after a long silence over pasta and red wine, he finally said, "Do you want me to move out?" It hit me like a slap. "No," I said immediately. I don't know who I am right now." He nodded. "You don't have to know, but I do need to know if I'm still wanted here." I looked at him. Really looked. His face was familiar now. Not just in the way a lover becomes familiar, but in the way a part of your home does. Like a chair that fits your back, or a mug you always reach for first. "You are," I said softly, but I didn't say for how long. Because part of me was already preparing for the end. Not because I didn't want him, but because I couldn't imagine a world where we made sense. We went to a gallery opening the next weekend. A friend of mine from university had curated a retrospective on postmodern femininity. The irony wasn't lost on me. People stared. A few whispered. One woman openly raised an eyebrow when I introduced Thomas as my guest. He was gracious. He always was. But I saw the flicker of discomfort in his eyes when I excused myself to speak with an old colleague, leaving him by the sculpture installation alone. On the way home, we didn't speak much, and that night I cried in the bathroom while the shower ran, trying to convince myself it was just steam stinging my eyes. When I crawled back into bed, he was already asleep, or pretending to be. I curled up beside him and rested my hand on his chest. His heart was beating slow and steady. But I knew something had shifted. We didn't end that night. That was the strangest part. There was no dramatic fight, no bags packed, no slammed door. Just a slow, silent unraveling that neither of us could admit out loud. Some mornings he still kissed me on the forehead before leaving. Some nights I still cooked for both of us. But the space between us began to fill with unsaid things. I would wake up and find myself watching him sleep, memorizing the curve of his shoulder, the mess of hair at his neck, the way his mouth stayed slightly parted when he dreamed. I kept telling myself this was temporary, the season, a shadow that would lift. But deep down, I knew we were circling an ending we were too scared to speak aloud. It came to a head on a Friday. I had a long day at the gallery, a meeting with a difficult donor, a broken sculpture pedestal that caused chaos, and an awkward encounter with one of the junior curators who still couldn't meet my eyes. When I got home, Thomas was in the kitchen, barefoot, drinking coffee. At 7 p.m., "I thought you had a seminar tonight," I said, kicking off my shoes. He didn't look at me. I did. I skipped it. I paused. "Everything okay?" He shrugged. "Fine." But it wasn't. I knew that tone. The kind that says, "I'm holding something back, because I don't know if you'll stay, if I tell you the truth." I poured myself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. You're not fine. He finally met my eyes. No, I'm not. Silence. I waited. Then he said it. I got offered a research placement in Florence for the autumn semester. I blinked. Oh, it's funded. Prestigious. Professor Mazzanti personally reached out. I didn't know what to say. Florence, Italy, months. When did this happen? I asked. Last week. And you didn't tell me. I didn't know how. I set my wine glass down too hard. It made a loud clink against the marble. You didn't know how? Or you didn't think I'd care? Don't, he said quickly. Don't do that. Of course I thought you'd care. That's why I didn't say anything. My chest felt tight. Are you going? He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, do you want me to? I hated him in that moment. For putting it on me. For asking me to be the one who said it out loud. But I also knew what he was really asking. Will you ask me to stay? Or will you let me go so we can both keep our dignity? I think, I said slowly, that if you don't go, you'll resent me. And if you do go, I'll resent myself. His eyes softened, but I could see the fracture beneath. I don't want to hurt you, he said. You already have. He stepped toward me, reached out, then thought better of it. Then tell me, what do you want? I didn't answer, because I didn't know anymore. I wanted the illusion, the quiet mornings, the borrowed intimacy. But I also wanted to disappear from the scrutiny, from the letters, from the glances in the street. That night, we didn't sleep in the same bed. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city, and wondering if I'd ever feel weightless again. The next day, I found a note on the kitchen table. Ellie, I don't know how to be good at this. I don't know how to leave and not miss you, or stay and not break us both. I love you. I don't care if people think that's foolish, but I also know you need space to be you again. I'll be back before December, if you want me to come back. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I folded the note and put it in the drawer next to my father's reading glasses. He left that afternoon. I didn't watch him go. A flat felt heavier without him. Not quieter. He'd never been loud, but emptier. I kept expecting to hear the water running in the bathroom, or his voice humming some old Bowie song as he chopped vegetables. Days passed, then weeks. I went back to work. I started taking long walks along the river at dusk, just to tire myself out enough to sleep. Sometimes I'd pass couples and feel a sharp ache in my chest. I never told anyone, not Lydia, not my friends. It was too complicated to explain, too sacred to reduce to gossip. Then, one morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. Florentine postmark, no name. Inside, a photo. It was a candid. Thomas standing outside a stone building, sunlit, smiling slightly, holding a cappuccino. On the back, in his handwriting, this made me think of you. The way you looked at me in the museum that first night. I miss you. T. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching it, heart thudding. Because suddenly I realized something I hadn't let myself feel. I didn't just miss him. I missed me, the version of myself he made me believe I still was. Desired, vibrant, not invisible. And in that moment, I knew. This story wasn't over. But it also wasn't going to go back to how it was. The next step would be mine. A day I decided to write him back, it rained. Not a soft romantic drizzle, but a full, unrelenting downpour. The kind that makes the city smell like metal and memory. I watched it from the window with a cup of tea in hand, the photo of him still on the table. He looked so much younger in that picture. Or maybe I just looked older now. I hadn't responded to his note. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know who I was without the version of myself that had existed with him, and I didn't want to write back from a place of emptiness. I wanted to write as someone who had chosen something, even if that something was solitude. But that morning, something in me shifted. I sat down with a pen, no laptop, no filter. I wrote in cursive like I hadn't in years. Thomas, you saw me when no one else did. Not the woman I used to be. Not the gallery director. Not my father's daughter. But the woman who still wanted. You gave her a name again, and I hate how easy it is to miss you. I've been angry. Not at you. At time. At shame. At how quickly joy starts to feel like something stolen. But I also know now. I would rather have 3 months of what we had than 10 years of what I had before. If you come back, I won't pretend anymore. Not for them. Not for the world. Not even for myself. Ellie, I folded it, sealed it, and mailed it before I could change my mind. The rain turned to wind that night. I opened the window and let it wash through the room like something cleansing. I sat in the chair by the bookshelf, his favorite, and let myself imagine him walking back in. Not like a fantasy, just a maybe. The next week passed in a blur. I returned to the gallery, but the work felt quieter now, as if it had shrunk. I still loved it, the smell of varnish, the sound of footsteps on polished floors, the hush of reverence in certain rooms. But something inside me was shifting. For so long, I had been defined by roles. Curator, daughter, widow, woman of a certain age. And now, I wanted to be something uncontained. A few nights later, I took myself to the museum where we'd first met. Not for a show, just to wander. I wore a long gray coat, silk scarf, and no makeup. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to see. And there, in the dim gallery light, I stood before a painting I hadn't looked at in years. A small, haunting portrait of a woman alone by a window, her posture tense, her eyes distant. Not sad, but aware. I stared at her until my legs ached. And then, quietly, I whispered, "I'm not done." It startled me, hearing my own voice in that space. But I meant it. I wasn't done. That weekend, Lydia called. "I saw him," she said, without preamble. My heart froze. "Who?" "You know who. He was at a lecture. Florence. He looks different. Older, somehow." I didn't ask how she knew. Lydia had always had her ways. Did he ask about me? "No," she said. "But he looked like he wanted to." I exhaled. "I sent him a letter." "Good." Silence stretched. Then she said, "Do you still love him?" I was quiet for a long time. "Yes." She didn't respond right away, but then her voice softened. "Then stop pretending you're supposed to be okay without him." That night I booked a flight to Florence. It was impulsive. It was irrational. It was unlike me. But I wasn't trying to be me anymore. I just wanted to be honest. The hotel was small and tucked away near the Arno. The receptionist smiled when I checked in and handed me a key with a brass tag. No digital codes, just metal and room numbers. I stood by the window that evening, looking at the cobblestones glowing under amber street lamps. And I waited. He didn't know I was coming. That was the point. I wanted him to see me, not expect me. The next morning I walked to the university. The campus was beautiful. Old stone, overgrown vines, voices echoing in courtyards. I found his building by the schedule posted outside. Philosophy of Language, room 202. I waited until his seminar ended. I stood across the street, behind a column, ridiculous in my nerves. And then I saw him, walking down the steps, notebook in hand, jacket slung casually over his shoulder. He looked the same, but lighter, as if a part of him had exhaled. I took a step forward. My shoes clicked on the stone. He turned at the sound and froze. Our eyes locked. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped toward me, slowly, carefully, as if afraid I might vanish. "Ellie?" he said, voice rough with disbelief. I nodded, throat tight. He reached out, touched my arm. Not possessively, just to make sure I was real. "I wasn't expecting. I didn't want you to." His eyes searched mine. "Why are you here?" I smiled, tears stinging. "Because I don't want to be brave anymore. I want to be with you." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He pulled me into him, pressed his forehead against mine, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled. We didn't speak much on the walk to his flat. The silence wasn't awkward. It was electric, buzzing between us like something alive. Every brush of his hand near mine felt louder than words. The streets of Florence blurred past in golden light, but all I could focus on was the way he walked beside me. Not ahead, not behind. Like we had somehow recalibrated our orbit. His apartment was small, second floor, with a blue door and plants clinging to the wrought iron railing. Inside, a narrow hallway, shelves of books, an espresso pot on the stove, and a single bed with tangled sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. He closed the door behind us and leaned against it for a second, as if grounding himself. I stood in the center of the room, unsure of what to do with my hands, my thoughts, my body. He looked at me, not with hunger, not with pity, with recognition. "I thought about you every day," he said quietly. I nodded. Because I didn't trust my voice yet, I kept thinking, he went on, that maybe we were just a story that made more sense in silence. I took a step toward him. "You are never just a story." He closed the space between us, slowly, as if asking permission with every movement. When his hands found my face, I didn't flinch. When his forehead touched mine, I closed my eyes and let out a breath I'd been holding for months. "I missed you," he whispered, "even when I didn't deserve to." "You never stopped deserving," I said, without meaning to, and it was the truth. There was no rush, no fumbling, no movie scene fever, just the slow, careful shedding of months of hesitation. He kissed me like he was remembering, not conquering. And I kissed him back, like I was reclaiming something. There's something different about being desired when you're no longer in your 20s. It's not about proving anything. It's not about validation. It's about being seen, holy, and chosen, still. When his hands moved to my waist, I didn't suck in my stomach. When he traced the lines along my collarbone, I didn't apologize for the way time had left its marks. I let him look. I let him touch. I let myself be, without caveats, without performance. Clothes found the floor one by one, but there was no urgency, just breath and skin, and the rediscovery of terrain we had only half-mapped before. We lay there afterward, tangled in sheets, limbs and hearts equally bare. No words, just the warmth of shared air. He brushed a strand of hair from my face and smiled. Not wide, but soft, like a secret only we knew. "I don't want this to be a pause," he said eventually. I turned to face him. "Neither do I. But the world won't make this easy. I'm done waiting for the world to give permission." He exhaled. "So what now?" I looked at him, really looked. "Now," I said. We stopped pretending that this was ever temporary. We spent the next few days wrapped in the bubble of a city not our own. Mornings were slow, coffee on the terrace, my legs draped over his lap, shared laughter over a badly sliced croissant. Afternoons we wandered, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes not, but always close enough to feel each other's presence. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me how the students looked at him differently now, some with respect, others with curiosity. I told him how the gallery felt smaller, how the silence in my flat echoed more after he left. One night, over pasta and red wine, I asked, "Do you ever think about what happens next?" He leaned back, thoughtful. "Sometimes." And he shrugged. "I think about a version of life that doesn't need to be explained to anyone, just lived." I smiled. "That sounds dangerous." He raised an eyebrow. "You've always liked danger. You just wore better heels back then." I laughed, really laughed, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like light. But the truth was, we both knew Florence was a shelter, not a solution. Eventually, we'd have to return, not just geographically, but to the versions of ourselves that existed before. Or maybe create new ones. The morning I was due to fly back, we stood in the kitchen, bare feet on cool tile, his shirt draped over my shoulders. Neither of us said much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been felt. He walked me to the taxi. The air was crisp, full of the scent of oranges and rain. Before I got in, he kissed me, not like a goodbye, but like a promise. "I'll come back," he said. "Soon." I nodded. "I'll be there, when you do." The car pulled away and I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. What we had wasn't fragile anymore. It was real. And real things don't break from distance. They grow. Coming back felt strange. Not bad, not good, just off, like I was stepping back into someone else's clothes. My flat was exactly as I left it, immaculate, curated, quiet. But I wasn't. The silence didn't soothe me anymore. It pressed. The airport ride home was long, gray, and uneventful. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past, my thoughts moving much faster than the traffic. The key still fit in the door, but everything felt different. I dropped my bag in the hallway and stood there a moment, not moving, just listening. I'd never noticed how loud my apartment could be when I was the only thing breathing inside it. Thomas had texted once, just a simple, "Landed safe, miss you already." I stared at it for a long time before responding. Me too. But the words didn't hold him. They only reminded me of the weight of his absence. I tried to settle back into my routines. Morning walks, emails, gallery meetings, the occasional dinner with colleagues. But everything had a film over it now, like I was watching my own life on a screen. One night, a week after my return, Lydia came over. She took one look at me and said, "So, you're either in love or in denial." I gave a tired smile. Bit of both, probably. We drank wine on my balcony, wrapped in shawls and sarcasm, as if we were still 30 and invincible. "You're not the same," she said eventually. I looked at her. "That obvious?" She nodded. "You walk lighter, but your eyes are heavier." I didn't answer right away. I just sipped. Then, softly, I said, "I don't know how to fit here anymore." Lydia studied me. "Maybe you're not supposed to." The gallery felt colder, somehow. I had always loved it, the clean walls, the smell of fresh paint, the soft murmur of cultured admiration. But now, every conversation felt like a performance I had outgrown. One afternoon, during a staff meeting, I caught myself tuning out completely, staring at a spot on the wall, remembering the way Thomas's fingers had traced my spine like a sentence he hadn't finished. I blinked hard and forced myself back. Focus, professional, unshakable. But something inside me was cracking. I started noticing other things. The way people spoke around me, not to me. The way younger curators leaned in toward male board members, playing a game I'd once mastered. The way donors still saw me as the polished widow with good taste, not the woman who had stood barefoot in a Florence kitchen wearing the man's shirt and nothing else. I was splitting. Two versions of myself walking side by side, only one of them still allowed in public. I saw my daughter Emily the following weekend. She brought her new boyfriend, a quiet architect with soft hands and a nervous smile. I liked him. Over dinner, Emily studied me more closely than usual. "You're different," she said, echoing Lydia's words. "You okay?" I smiled, too quickly. "Just tired." But she didn't let it go. "Is it about the funeral? About Grandpa?" I shook my head. "It's not about death, Em. It's about what comes after." She didn't press further, but I could feel her curiosity, tightening like thread. When they left, I sat alone in the living room, candles flickering, the scent of her perfume still lingering. I picked up my phone, stared at his name, didn't call. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, naked. Not to criticize, not to analyze, just to look. I touched my own skin as if mapping a place I hadn't visited in years. Not young, not old, just me. And for the first time, I didn't flinch, but I did cry. Not from regret, from recognition. Thomas called 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. My hand hovered over the screen as if it might burn me. But then, I did. "Hey," he said, voice soft. "I miss your silence." I laughed. "That's a first." "I miss everything," he said. "Even the way you breathe when you're annoyed." I sank onto the edge of the bed. I don't know how to do this here. I don't know how to be this version of me with the walls listening. "I know," he said, "but we don't have to fit into anything. Not anymore." "I'm afraid," I whispered. "Me too," he said. "But I'd rather be afraid with you." We talked for 2 hours. About nothing. About everything. He told me about a lecture he'd given. A student who challenged him on Kierkegaard. A dream he'd had where I was painting. Something I'd never done. And I told him about Emily. About the wine I spilled on my white blouse in the middle of a donor dinner. About the art piece I saw that made me think of him. A sculpture with a cracked center that still stood. Before we hung up, he said, "Come back." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, "Would you come here?" Silence. Then, "Do you want me to?" I closed my eyes. I want to stop feeling like I'm two different women. And I don't know if that means staying or leaving. But I know I want you in that picture. Whichever version of me I choose. He exhaled. "Then I'll come." I smiled. "Soon?" "As soon as I can." When we hung up, I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. There was no perfect answer. No movie ending certainty. But there was a promise now. Not of forever, but of again. And that was enough. I didn't sleep the night before he arrived. Not from anxiety, not anymore, but from something more complex. Like my body knew that a shift was coming and wanted to sit with itself before the tide rolled in. I cleaned the flat, even though it was already spotless, changed the sheets, lit a candle in the bathroom that smelled like cedar and old books, rearranged the pictures on the hallway shelf 3 times before deciding to remove them altogether. It wasn't about making space for him. It was about removing the pieces of me that were built only for solitude. He arrived on a Thursday, late afternoon, light coming in sideways through the windows, hitting the wooden floors just right. I watched the taxi pull up from behind the curtain like I was 17 again. He stepped out, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the building like he was daring it to judge him. When the intercom buzzed, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door before he could knock. For a second, we just stood there. No hug, no kiss, just a look. Like two people meeting each other again after traveling separate roads through the same storm. And then I stepped back. He came in, dropped his bag gently, turned to me. "I was afraid you'd look different," he said. "I was afraid you wouldn't." He smiled, eyes tired but soft. "Hi." Hi. We didn't rush into each other's arms. We didn't fall onto the couch in a flurry of desperate hands. We moved through the space carefully, like learning the dimensions of a room built for 2. I offered him tea. He accepted. We sat in the kitchen, talked about his flight, the weather, how the city hadn't changed much. It was awkward, in that particular way that happens when your heart is moving faster than your words. Then he said it, very softly. "You're still wearing your ring." I looked down at my hand. I hadn't even noticed. Habit? Fear? A final thread I hadn't cut? I slid it off, laid it on the table. Neither of us said anything. Later, we sat on the couch, a safe distance apart, our knees almost touching. "I don't know what this is," I admitted. "Me neither," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." The next morning, I woke up and he was already in the kitchen, making coffee, wearing one of my old sweaters, too small in the arms, sleeves pulled up. He looked like he belonged, and that terrified me. We moved around each other like dancers, silent in rhythm, figuring out how two separate lives might begin to overlap without bruising the parts that mattered. Some days were golden, effortless. We'd walk through parks, eat late breakfasts, find quiet corners of bookstores where his fingers would brush mine and I'd remember how far we'd come. Other days, the shadows returned. I'd find myself pulling away when he reached for me in bed. Not because I didn't want him, but because I was scared of losing myself again, of becoming a supporting character in someone else's narrative. He never pushed, but I saw the questions in his eyes. "Do you want me here?" he asked once, his voice barely audible over the rain tapping the windows. "I do," I said, "but I also want to want myself, and sometimes I forget how." He nodded. "Then let's help each other remember." It wasn't always romantic. We argued about dishes. I snapped at him once for using my hairbrush. He got annoyed when I asked if he'd applied for jobs, said he felt like I was mothering him. It stung. Not because he was wrong, but because some part of me still believed that loving someone younger meant constantly proving I wasn't trying to control. "I'm not your teacher," I told him, "and I'm not your student," he replied. And just like that, the wall cracked. But we patched it. With late-night apologies, with hands that reached instead of retreated. With forgiveness that didn't keep score. One evening, we went to a dinner party. A gallery friend. Lots of wine, curated playlists. The kind of crowd that says, "Darling," a little too often. People stared. Not rudely, just long enough. Someone asked how we met. Thomas answered, "At a bad time, but for the right reasons." After, I asked him, "Do you ever feel embarrassed?" He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Of what?" "Of this. Of me." He stepped closer. "You think that little of me?" "No, I think that little of me." He touched my cheek. "Then let me show you who you are." That night, we made love like it was the first time. And maybe it was. Maybe this version, this new us, hadn't existed until that moment. But the world doesn't always wait for your timing. Emily came by unannounced one Saturday. Thomas answered the door. Her face froze. The silence between them was volcanic. She looked at me, then back at him. "You," she said, seriously. I tried to explain. She wouldn't hear it. "You lied to me. All this time." "I didn't lie," I said, voice shaking. I didn't know how to tell you something. I barely understood myself." She stormed out. It broke something in me. I cried that night, harder than I had in months. Thomas held me, wordless, rocking me like a child. "I shouldn't have let it happen," I said. "But you did. We did. And I don't regret it." "I do." He pulled back. "Just for now," I whispered. Emily didn't speak to me for weeks. Eventually, she wrote an email. Long, careful, distant. She wasn't angry anymore. Just hurt. I replied. Honest, unpolished, vulnerable. Told her I didn't expect her approval, just her understanding. We met for coffee weeks later. It wasn't a healing, but it was a start. Thomas got a teaching position, not far. He moved into a small flat nearby. We didn't live together. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we were close enough to remain real. I wore the sweater he gave me when I walked the markets. He left notes in my books when he borrowed them. We lived in tandem. Not entangled, not dependent. Just present. I started painting. Nothing good, but real. Raw, ugly, beautiful. One night, I looked around my flat. The walls softer, the windows open, and I felt peace. Not ecstasy, not certainty, just peace. I picked up my phone, opened the camera, and I said, "My name is Eleanor. I'm 51 years old. I fell in love with a man half my age. I broke rules. I broke hearts. I broke my own beliefs. But I didn't break. I grew. I chose myself. And him. and the version of love that didn't ask for permission. I paused, then whispered, and I'd do it again.